It's wonderful to have you all here tonight. I'm thrilled to kick off the 5th season of our Life of a Poet series. It's hard to believe we've been doing it for 5 years. Thanks to Diana Ingraham and everyone here at the Hill Center for helping make this possible. And of course, thanks to Ron Charles for continuing on with this series. I feel like, this is what I wrote, I feel like I can't even brag about Ron's turn to poetry anymore.
Oh, you can.
But I can't. Instead, I can say he's become legendary for his in-depth conversation with poets here at the Hill Center over the last 5 years. I wanted to say legend and mean it. Before I go any further, let me tell you a little bit about the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress. We are home to the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, and we put on programs like this here at the Hill Center and at the library's Capitol Hill campus and around the country. We'd love to have you come to more of our programs. So if you want to check us out, you can go to www.loc.gov/poetry. We've also passed out a little survey that you all should have, which we'd love to have you fill out. You can hand them to me afterwards. We'd love to know what you think of the program. The rest of the PLC staff is in the front. You can hand them the surveys too. We'll all be happy to get them. Today, if you don't know, is the start of the fiscal year in terms of the federal government, of which we are a part. And I can't imagine a better way to start FY19 than to kick off this year's LOPE season. We call it LOPE in the office. And I couldn't be more excited to introduce tonight's featured poet, Marilyn Chin. I have heard Marilyn read only twice and only briefly at a Brooklyn book party to celebrate the launch of her 2014 collection, Hard Love Province, and the year before when she read as part of then Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey's closing event, Necessary Utterance, Poetry as Cultural Force. I'll never forget seeing her up on the Coolidge Auditorium stage, reading poems with such necessary force that it seemed like they might blow the speakers. Hers are poems willing to face up to death and loss, and also unabashed in their lyric playfulness. They can be bawdy and prophetic and sorrowful, can dazzle with wild images and be joyously talky, can feel steeped in history and form and also charged with challenges to our moment. Listening to her then, I thought only, I want to hear more. And luckily, here we are. Please join me in welcoming Marilyn Chin.
Oh.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you for loving poetry.
Yeah, thank all of you for coming too. And if you can't hear it sometime, just call out. It's very informal, and we'll adjust.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Come on a little more. We put it here. Okay.
I want to thank Rob for being such a cheerleader for poetry. We got to give him a
yes. One of your early poems begins. Beginning is always difficult. But the beginning of this conversation doesn't feel difficult because I've spent all week in conversation with you and your work, but it's all been one way, and now I'm so looking forward to asking you about this. I want to start with this incredible event that starts early in your life where your folks move from Hong Kong to the United States and you eventually settle in Portland. Why did they do that, and how did you feel about it?
Oh, God. I don't know. I was a child. I guess I had no power in those decisions. I was born in Hong Kong in 1955 in a cold water flat, if you remember those, in colonial Hong Kong. And there were open sewers. There were 15 of us in a small apartment. And it was very, yeah. And my father was already in the U.S. He worked in various restaurants in what I call Piss River, Oregon, or various restaurants in Portland, Oregon, and so we came as the family came shortly after he first went to the U.S. and then he brought my mother and the family over.
And how old were you?
I was 7 years old.
So you know what was going on.
I guess so. Yeah. I was, and when I was very young, I remember my grandmother carrying me on her back.
She came too?
Yeah, the whole family came,
Okay.
and she used to sing Chinese poems. She used to chant Chinese poems. She was illiterate, but she had a prodigious memory, and she memorized various poems from the Tang Dynasty and Confucius sayings, and she was incredible. And then she used to walk, carry me around on her back, and so the very first words I heard were poetry. Yeah, and I've loved poetry ever since. So.
Did she speak English?
No.
Did you?
No.
Your mother?
No. Nobody spoke English.
How did that come about? How did you gradually learn English?
Well, when we immigrated to Portland, I started school. That's what and it's really interesting how first I changed languages several times, because first I spoke in the dialect of Taishan, and then then we moved to Hong Kong. When I was born in Hong Kong, I spoke Cantonese, and then when I came to the United States, I learned English, and so it was pretty much a trilingual family, because there were dialect differences, and nobody spoke English, so the children served as translators.
You all learned it first, and then brought it home from school.
We brought, but my mother never really learned English, and my grandmother didn't know a word of English. Yeah. So.
You say in one piece, poetry is a vast orphanage. In another poem you write, poetry is my nunnery. Here I am alone in my altar, self-hate, self-love, both erotic notions. What led you to write poetry, and why does it sometimes feel like that, a lonely place, sometimes holy, sometimes bereft?
Well, I think poetry saved my life in many ways. I was a very lonely, quiet child, and there was a lot of intergenerational problems, as if you can imagine in a family like that. And I would read a lot of poetry, and a lot of the poetry I didn't know what they meant. When I was younger, I read Shakespeare, I read Emily Dickinson, I read all kinds of poetry, and I didn't know what they meant, but somehow they soothed me, and the poems soothed me. And I suppose I learned that soothing from my grandmother, who used to chant Chinese poetry with me on her back. Therefore, I think that poets are solitary animals. We have to, we read and write. I mean, it's very difficult in that if you're a playwright, or if you're if you write for TV, you have a lot of people to work with, right? But poets, we sort of sit. My favorite thing to do is to go to the Harvard Yenjing Library and read, and it's that solitary conversation that I have with the ancients, with the Tang Dynasty poets, that really warms my heart. So. Yeah, we're poetry nerds. I love poetry. We're poetry nerds. So what can I say?
Well, what about how did your family react to this decision to go into poetry?
Oh my gosh, are you kidding?
It's a long way from becoming an engineer or a doctor.
Yeah, doctor, lawyer, poet. Oh my gosh, gosh. I guess I had an old uncle who was crazy, and he lived on, he was the village idiot, and then he was the poet, I don't know. And but when I finally found a teaching job, they felt better about that. But I was always the weird child anyway. It was,
Would you read Poetry Camp, which I think might contain some of that?
Poetry Camp.
Your family's frustration.
Well, this is a new sequence, a prose poem sequence. So it's a prose, Poetry Camp. Grandmother, when can I go to poetry camp? What in hell is poetry camp? Where a bunch of teenage girls go into the woods to write poetry. I know what teenage girls do in the woods, and it's not poetry. You may not go to poetry camp. You must scrub the soy sauce off the walls of the restaurant, then study for the SAT exam. Grandmother, what if I spurn you and go to poetry camp? Then you will shame your ancestors with your foolish dreams, and in your vain attempts to change your destiny, you will trip and fall off your platform shoes, break your neck, and amount to nothing. This is the grandmother. And this how supportive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
is.
pretty encouraging. You write so movingly and sometimes very wittily about the pain of assimilation.
Oh,
In many poems. In a short poem called Prelude, dedicated to your mother, you write, although the country is lost, rivers and mountains remain, and we shall always live in this poetry that you love.
That first line is actually from Du Fu, from the Tang Dynasty poet Du Fu. And it goes, 国破山河在, which means although the country is lost, rivers and mountains remain. It is such an amazing line. It says all on that one, in those 5 characters. And yeah, and I feel that I've lost many countries, but rivers and mountains remain. There's some, there is.
And the poetry remains.
The poetry remains, yeah.
If you'd read this poem, we are Americans now.
Yeah, these are early poems. I wrote them in my 20s. Okay. He digs up all this dirt. Okay. We are Americans now. We live in the tundra. Today, in hazy San Francisco, I face seaward toward China, a giant begonia, pink, fragrant, bitten by vertebrates and insects. I sing her a blues song. Even a Chinese girl gets the blues. Her reticence is black and blue. Let's sing about the extinct Bengal tigers, about giant pandas. Ling Ling loves Xing Xing, yet we will not mate. We are not impotent, we are important. We blame the environment, we blame the zoo. What shall we plant for the future? Bamboo, sassafras, coconut palms? No, legumes, wheat, maize, old swine to milk the new. We are Americans now. We live in the tundra of the logical, a sea of cities, a wood of cars. Farewell, my ancestors, hirsute Taoist, failed scholars. Farewell, my wet nurse who feared and loathed the Catholics, who called out, now that the half men have occupied Canton, hide your daughters, lock your doors. I didn't have a wet nurse. We were too poor to have a wet, but apparently in that building, women would share their milk, their breast milk, because some women had problems with their breast milk. So I didn't, we weren't rich enough but I thought wet nurse is an interesting word. Yeah, it's
And I love the way the poem celebrates America and mocks it at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
This is when I started to be comedic here.
Yes. There's a poem about things you never forget called The Floral Apron.
Oh, students love that poem.
Well, I love it too.
Yeah, I didn't remember. They always ask them. Yeah. The floral apron. The woman wore a floral apron around her neck. That woman from my mother's village, with a sharp cleaver in her hand. She said, "What shall we cook tonight?" Perhaps these 6 tiny squid lined up so perfectly on the block. She wiped her hand on the apron. pierced the blade into the first. There was no resistance, no blood, only cartilage, soft as a child's nose. A last iota of ink made us wince. Suddenly, the aroma of ginger and scallion fogged our senses, and we absolved her for that moment's barbarism. Then she, an elder of the tribe, without formal headdress, without elegance, deigned to teach the younger about the Asian plight. And although we have traveled far, we must never forget that primal lesson on patience, courage, forbearance, on how to love squid despite squid, how to honor the village, the tribe, that floral apron.
You can see why.
Oops, sorry.
It's just,
Okay.
it'll be fine. I think it'll be fine there. It's just your.
Okay.
As long as it's still working.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
You can see why people love that poem. It's so sensuous. It's so filled with imagery of sight and touch and smell. It so captures the things we do retain forever from childhood. And it's witty.
It's interesting. The students either say, "Ooh, why did you have to use the image of squid?" But it depends. It's really culturally bound. If you're from Greece, you love squid. If you're from Hong Kong, you love squid.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're from the Bronx, you might not like squid.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yes, there's something about the kitchen table, and mother's apron.
Right.
And what's interesting about this poem is that for a time, people would send me their aprons.
Oh. Wow.
Yes, because I read this. It was Bill Moyers, introduced this poem in his PBS. Remember his PBS special? And I got all these aprons from women. And yeah, everybody remembers their mother's kitchens.
Yes.
I think that's why this poem is personal and universal.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peculiar and universal at the same time. A longer poem called "How I Got That Name," much anthologized.
Yeah. It's one of those poems. If I don't read it, Rob would have a fit. If I don't read it, or somebody would say, "You gotta read this."
Yeah. Well, I've been working up to it here. Is it it's in that collection, number 4?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Should I read the whole thing?
If you don't mind, it is long, but I think it's so good, and it deals with so many of your most essential themes.
I usually
Here it is.
I usually perform this one.
Oh.
So it's all right. Okay, I usually perform this one. It's called "How I Got That Name," an essay on assimilation.
You need it?
I am Marilyn Chin. Oh, how I love the resoluteness of that first person singular, followed by that stalwart indicative, a be, without that uncertain ing of becoming. Of course, the name had been changed somewhere between Angel Island and the sea, when my father, the paper son, in the late 1950s, obsessed with a bombshell blonde, transliterated Mei Ling to Marilyn. And nobody dared question his initial impulse, for we all know lust drove men to greatness, not goodness, not decency. And there I was, a wayward pink baby, named after some tragic white woman, swollen with gin and Nembutal. My mother couldn't pronounce the R. She dubbed me #1 female offshoot for brevity. Henceforth, she will live and die in sublime ignorance, flanked by loving children, the kitchen deity, where my father dithers, a tomcat in Hong Kong trash, a gambler, a petty thug who bought a chain of chop suey joints in Pierce River, Oregon, with bootleg Gucci cash. Nobody dared question his integrity, given his nice, devout daughters and his bright, industrious sons, as if filial piety were the standard by which all earthly men were measured. Oh, how trustworthy our daughters, how thrifty our sons, how we manage to fool the experts in education, statistics, and demography. We're not very creative, but not adverse to rote learning, rote learning, rote learning. Indeed, they can use us, but the model minority is a tease. We know you are watching, and we refuse to give you any. Oh, bamboo shoots, the further west we go, we'll hit east. The deeper down we dig, we'll find China. History has turned its stomach on a black, polluted beach where life doesn't hinge on that red wheelbarrow. But whether or not our new lover in that final episode of Santa Barbara will lean over a scented candle and call us a bitch. Oh Lord, where have we gone wrong? We have no inner resources. Then one redolent spring morning, the great patriarch Chin peered down from his kiosk in heaven and saw that his descendants were ugly. One had a squarish head and nose without a bridge, another's profile long and knobbed as a gourd. A third, the sad, brutish one, may never, never marry. And I, his least favorite, not quite boiled, not quite cooked, a plump pomfret simmering in my juices. Too listless to fight for my people's destiny. To kill without resistance is not slaughter, says the proverb. So I wait for imminent death. The fact that this death is also metaphorical is testament to my lethargy. So here lies Marilyn Chin, married once, twice to so-and-so, a Lee and a Wong, daughter of the virtuous Yuequin Wong and Gigi Chin, the infamous, sister of a dozen, cousin of a million, survived by everybody and forgotten by all. She was neither black nor white, neither cherished nor vanquished, just in her squat her own bamboo grove, minding her poetry, when one day heaven was unmerciful and a chasm opened where she stood, like the jaws of a mighty white whale or the maw of a metaphysical Godzilla. It swallowed her whole. She did not flinch, nor writhe, nor fret about the afterlife, but stayed solid as wood, happily, though gnawed, tattered, mesmerized by all that was lavished upon her and all that was taken away.
Wow.
Oh, dear. So,
That's
I had to
fantastic.
read this one for you, my dear.
That is your song of myself, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. A song of myself. I mean, if you're a short little Chinese poet and you need to insert yourself into the poetry world, how shall I do this? And I shall do it with as loud, as forceful as possible. Yeah.
Some of us, I heard gasping. We're catching references to other poems in there.
Oh yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And some TV shows.
Yeah.
It's comic and tragic to have your identity just sort of casually remade after some, as you say, tragic white woman swollen with gin.
Yeah.
You never changed your name back when you could have.
Well, because Mei Ling appears in my fiction and appears in the poetry as an alter ego, but I don't know, because are there many women named? Are you naming your kids Marilyn these days? It's really, what happened to that name? I think it's kind of an interesting name, actually. Yeah, my father was like, he was a rake, so he translated literally Mei Ling to Marilyn, and then my sister's name was Mei Jen, and he named her Jane, and after Jane Mansfield. So talking about bombshell blondes, that's yet another story. But those are.
Twice in that poem you say no one dared question him. But
Yeah.
you obviously question him.
Oh yes, he's. I am very rebellious because of my father. Yeah. But the name, I like the name Marilyn Chin, I guess. Yeah. Mei Ling. You know, I started with Marilyn Mei Ling Chin, and it's a little long.
Right.
It makes Mei Ling look like an afterthought, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like a translate, yeah, ladies or something like that. So, yeah.
You say in that poem, all was lavished upon her and all that was taken away.
That's right. I mean, that's how we feel about our life. We're all temporary here, right?
Yes.
And I feel very blessed to have. I was born in a cold water flat, and I was one of many small little girls born in that flat and in that building. And I remember the story about this uncle who looked at me and said, "Oh, she's so small and dark. Maybe we should sell her." I mean, that was supposed to be a joke.
Yes.
But and so I feel so fortunate to be able to write poetry, to be able to express myself, to be in this world, to celebrate poetry. I mean, how great is that?
It is. And that poem is very wry and very funny. But there's another one that deals with some of the same themes called "That Half Is Almost Gone."
Oh.
Which is not funny. It's really very sad.
Yeah. Actually, I try to be funny because I'm a deeply depressed person. Can't you tell?
No, we cannot tell.
Yeah. That half is almost gone. That half is almost gone. The Chinese half, the fair side of the peach, darkened by the knife of time, fades like a cruel sun. In my 30th year, I wrote a letter to my mother. I had forgotten the character for love. I remember vaguely the radical heart. The ancestors won't fail to remind you, the vital and vestigial organs where the emotions come from. But the rest is fading. A dash dissects in midair. I, more of a cry than a sigh, and no help from the phoneticist. You are a Chinese, my mother was adamant. You are a Chinese, my mother less convinced. Are you not Chinese? My mother now accepting. As the cataract clouds her vision, and her third daughter marries a Protestant West Virginian who is very handsome and very kind. The mystery is still unsolved. The landscape looms over man, and the gaffer-hatted fishmonger sings to his cormorant. And the maiden behind the curtain is somebody's courtesan, or merely Rose Wong's aging daughter, pondering the blue void. You are a Chinese, said my mother, who once walked the fields of her dead. Today, on the 36th anniversary of my birth, I have problems now, even with the salutation. Thank you. Yeah, it's a nice audience.
It's such a beautiful and harrowing image of not being able to remember the word for love when you're talking to your mom.
With the character, I'm playing with homophony here. It's a cry when it's a cry, but it's homophonous with I, which love, and so it's a pun there, and also the visual pun because the slash goes through the heart. The character, the ideogram of heart. There's a slash that goes right through that character. So I'm playing with the pictograph, and also playing with the sound of that character for love. Right. So there's all that stuff going on, and when you look at the poem, the left side, when I write the line, that half is almost gone, there's a break to the next line, the Chinese have. So visually, you from the very first line, you see that, the despair. You see that cut, and so I was playing with the visual aspects of the poem and the sonic aspects of the poem.
Right.
And pondering the blue void, I try to give it space, that line. So when you have it, so when you read it, you have, there's all this play with the page, the space and everything. So yeah, it's really amazing how much Chinese I've lost. When I go to Beijing, go to Hong Kong, I can barely speak to people. It's just, it's so easy. I remember, I think it's around sixth grade, in which English completely took over. And I started dreaming in English. Then I realized it took over my other half. And I don't know, bilingual, any of you bilingual, I don't know. I have friends who are perfectly bilingual, but I think I'm only 80%. I'm only 20% now.
So losing the language becomes combined with losing the culture, losing your ancestors. It's losing all kinds of complicated things that are wound together in that poem. In another poem you write, "My loss is your loss, a dialect here, a memory there. If my left hand is dying, will my right hand cut it off? We shall all be vestigial organs, the gift of democracy, the pale faces, the wan conformity. The price we pay for comfort is our mother tongue."
Yes, it is very sad. I mourn this all the time.
Yeah. But it's the essential American story. Is that
Yeah,
you come here,
yes,
you're blessed with freedom and riches, and you lose this rich heritage.
That's right. And then I think now there's there's this new identity thing now, in which poets want to write about their identity now. But I think it is a problem of assimilation. It is, and it's hard work to try to keep yourself bilingual. To keep bilingual. I mean, it's very hard work, and to keep the cultures.
Right.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're struggling to assimilate at the same time.
Yes. And as a teenager, you want to be like everybody. You want to conform. You want to be like everybody else. Right. You don't want to be different. Right.
Identity poem number 99.
Oh, okay. Talking about identity. Okay. Ron Charles, he's digging into these poems I haven't read for years.
Now, there aren't 98 other identity poems, are there?
Well, I'm just, trying to be, I've written a lot of identity poems. Some of them are still in the drawer, right?
Okay. But the number 99 there was meant ironically.
No, yeah. Okay. Identity poem 99. Are you the sky or the allegory for loneliness? Are you the only Chinese restaurant in Roseburg, Oregon? A half-breed war orphan adopted by proper Christians? A heathen toy dog, a creamy half and half? Are you a dingy vinyl address book, a wrist without a corsage? Are you baby's breath, face down on a teenage road in America? Are you earphones, detached, left dangling on an airplane jack to diaspora? Are you doomed to a childhood without music, weary of your granny's one-string woebegone erhu, mewling about the past? Are you hate speech, or are you a lullaby? And anecdotes requiring footnotes, an ethnic joke rehashed. How many Chinamen does it take to screw? How many Chinamen does it take to screw a light bulb? Are you so poor that you cannot call your mother? You have less than $2 on your phone card, and it's a long cable to Nirvana. Are you a skylight through which The bus girl sees heaven, a chopping block stained by the blood of 10,000 innocents, which daily the same bus girl must wipe off. Does existence preempt essence? I being what my ancestors were not. Suddenly, you're a vegan vegetarian. Restaurant is a facticity, and getting the hell out is transcendence. Was the punchline incandescent? Was a nosebleed your last tender memory of her? Did he say, no dogs and China women? Are you a rose or a tattoo of fire? Well, I haven't read this one for a while, Ron Charles.
It's such a powerful recitation and denunciation of all those horrible slurs, which you turn each one.
Yeah, there was that ethnic joke. I mean, there's these jokes you hear, or these slurs you hear in your childhood, and
And all these cliches about who you are, who you can be, to try and slot everyone into the identities we expect of them. This becomes more complex when you start dating. And falling in love. Not with other Chinese people, much to your parents' horror.
Yeah, that's right.
I love him. I hate him. I don't know how. I'm biracial. I'm torn in two, you write in one poem. He is so fair you can see the Thames pulsing in his temples. So fair he blanched the skies of the suburbs. You love him anyway. His beauty is all you know. So fair you imagine sewing his gray children. In a parking lot you say to Marguerite, why must I yearn for his bland porridge?
That's called weaponizing your images.
I want you to read one stanza from the end of this poem. Where's number 9? My lap. Would you start here?
Oh, okay.
There. This is your mother reacting to a young man you brought home, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So you've come home finally with your new boyfriend. What's his name? Ezekiel. Odd name for a boy. Your mother can't pronounce it. And she doesn't like his demeanor. Too thin, too sallow. He does not eat beef in a country where beef is possible. He cannot play the violin in a country where rapture is possible. He beams a tawdry smile. Perhaps he is hiding bad intentions. And that moon, which accompanied his arrival, that moon won't drink and is shaped naughtily like a woman's severed ear.
You didn't marry him, did you?
No. Oh boy, but I dated lots of creeps. Don't.
We're going to stand up and turn around and sit back down. Just so they can,
Okay.
They've been listening very hard.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Go on, stand up. You, stand up.
Okay.
This isn't an intermission, though. We're just standing up. Now we're going to sit back down.
That's great.
Now let's keep talking about your mother. She's such a character in these poems. In a poem called Alba, you speak of your mother as the moon. What a beautiful poem.
Actually, my mother was a very sad character. I mean, I felt that that I need to avenge my mother's death. I feel that my father ruined her life. So basically that's why I write poetry, to avenge my mother. Yeah, So
read that poem.
Oh yeah. Take a left at the waters of samsara. Do you know this? What samsara is? It's a cycle, it's a cycle of life and death. It's a reincarnation, the life, a continuous reincarnation. There is a bog of sacred water behind a hedgerow of mild matter. Near the grave of my good mother, tin cans blossom there. The rust shimmers like amber, a diorama of green gnats ecstatic in their veiled dance. A nation of frogs regale, swell-throated, bass-toned. One belts and rages, the others follow. They fuck blissfully, trapped in their cycle of rebirth, transient love, unprepared for higher ground. And I, my mother's aging girl, myopic, goat-footed, got snagged on an unmarked trail. The road diverged. I took the one less traveled, blah, blah. You know what I'm referring to in that line, right? I sit at her grave for hours. A slow drizzle purifies my flesh. I still yearn for her womb and can't detach. I chant new poems, my best fascicle. Stupid pupil, the truth is an oxymoron and exact. Eternity can't be proven to the dead. What is the void but motherlessness? The song bellies up. The sun taketh. The rain ceases to bless. Yeah.
I still yearn for her womb and can't detach. What was the source of your mother's unhappiness?
My father, didn't I say he was a rake?
Yeah. And her situation was not uncommon, you suggest.
Yeah.
Many women suffered from those situations.
And she stopped eating and died at 62. She just didn't want to live. So she was but she was such a good woman. She was a very important role model. She was ethic. She was ethical. She was so pure. She was pure-hearted. Yeah. But that poem, interesting about these poems you've chosen. That poem, I reread it the other day, and I felt that it was a perfect poem. That there's something about the lines and how they were carved, and I couldn't change a thing in that poem. I mean, there's something about precision, and I learned from Chinese poetry. This is the precision of the line, the precision of the imagery.
Talk about that, because the languages seem so different.
You feel that the language is different?
The languages seem so different in their construction.
How
do you translate that lesson of precision from Chinese into English?
Chinese, I studied, for my undergraduate degree was in Chinese poetry, and I studied the Chinese poem deeply and heavily. I was really into it. I was such a nerd, right? But classical Chinese poetry, there's no inflectional morphology. There are no tenses. Lack of case, tense. And some poems there aren't verbs. It's so concise and precise, and the imagery is so precise that I try to bring that into my English my writing, and that's I think that's why I've been developing in a Chinese American aesthetics, yes. A Chinese American quatrain, a Chinese American poem, where I borrow from the ancient Chinese poetry, and try to bring that precision into some of my poems. I write different kinds of poems. I write long line poems and talky poems, and some poems shout at you, but that some poems are really influenced by Chinese poetry, and so it's a wonderful puzzle for me to try to bring Chinese poetry into into the Western world. And
it is wonderful for us. Here's a poem that captures I imagine what your mother went through, but what so many women go through.
Which one?
On this side here.
Oh, this one. Ron Charles. Okay.
You should have told me what poems not to ask you to read.
Okay, this one is called Variations on an Ancient Theme, The Drunken Husband, right? These are written in octaves and fashioned after Dufu's octaves, his Lusher. I won't get into the geeky information regarding that form, but there's also these folk songs, these ancient folk songs that talk about drunken husbands. They would come home, these drunken husbands would come home, and of course the woman would wait for him in her finest, outfits, and she would forgive him for, after he's, come home from the brothel. Of course, these poems were written by men, right? So I talk back to those poets, and there's a dog that goes through this poem, and in Chinese poetry, there's often this dog he's often the harbinger of good luck, of good news. But in this sequence, he's a harbinger of bad news. And this is one of my issue poems about domestic violence. So, and these are different vignettes. These are vignettes of different situations, different families. Variations on an ancient theme, the drunken husband. The dog is barking at the door. Daddy crashed the car. Hush, kids, go to your room. Don't come out until it's over. He stumbles in the dim-lit stairs, drops his Levi's to his ankles. Touch me and I'll kill you, she says, pointing a revolver at his head. The dog is barking at the door. She doesn't recognize the master. She sniffs his guilty crotch, positioned to bite it off. Jesus, control your dog. A man can't come back to his castle. Kill him, Ling Ling, she sobs, curlers bobbing on her shoulders. The dog is barking at the door. Quiet, Spot, let's not wake her. The bourbon is sour on his breath, lipstick on his proverbial collar. He turns on the computer in the den. He calms the dog with a bone. Upstairs, she sleeps facing the wall, dreaming about the perfume river. The dog is barking at the door. He stumbles in swinging. Where is my gook of a wife? Where are my half-breed monsters? There is silence up the cold stairs. No movement, no answer. The drawers are open like graves. The closets agape to the rafters. The dog is barking at the door. He stumbles in singing. How is my teenage bride? How is my mail-order darling? Perhaps she's pretending to be asleep, waiting for her man's hard cock. He enters her from behind. Her sobbing does not deter him. The dog is barking at the door. What does the proud beast know? Who is both master and intruder? Whose bloody handprint on the wall? Whose revolver in the dishwasher? The neighbors won't heed her alarm. She keeps barking, barking, bent on saving their kind. I think domestic violence will do us in. We just...
That's a devastating poem.
Yeah, it's...
And you say that you've borrowed from a Chinese form and even a Chinese theme. So it's not just a translation, it's a transformation of that form into a very different kind of poem.
Right. I use the formal base, but then I bring in contemporary themes and ideas and issues. I see myself as an activist poet, and I write about the issues of the day. And And also, it's personal, it's political, and my
Yes.
family is just filled with strife, and yeah, and therefore I feel like I must write about it.
What's so chilling is, each of those, are they quatrains?
The octaves, yeah.
Octaves. Each of them is parallel, each of them very similar, but each of them different in different cultures at different times, obviously. But it's essentially the same story over and over again.
Right.
It reminds me, of course, of Dr. Ford's testimony when women all over the country said, yes, that's exactly, I mean, people in my own family told me, yes, that's exactly what happened to me at a party.
Yeah.
Everyone's had this happen, apparently.
Yes, and women's issue. I mean, I wrote this poem 20 years ago, and it's and it's universal.
Yes.
We're still suffering from from violence
And the denial of it.
and denial.
That's all
yeah.
part of it. It's acting like it never happens or being surprised.
And yeah, so yeah, that's why these certain poems live on. Either they're universal.
Every woman has her own chimera. That's a very different kind of feminist poem, right? Oh, where is that? Number 16.
I wrote this poem for Adrienne Rich. Did you know Adrienne Rich? Yeah.
Of course. I can't have you read we won't get to the whole thing, but just you'll see when to stop.
You want? Shall I read this?
I've got a little mark on the other side. Next page.
I stop here. I read.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wrote this suite for Adrienne Rich. Every woman is her own chimera. Every woman is her own chimera. Today she is laughing with Julio. Tonight she is dancing with Coolio. How long can happiness last? For a slow, brief afternoon, my head on the thigh of a sequoia, reading Wang Wei. Butterfly in mouth, but don't bite down. Whose life is it anyway? She born of chrysalis and shit, or she born of woman and pain? Mei Ling brings a wounded poem, crying, please, mommy, mommy, fix it. You wipe the tears from her cheek, then glue a gnat's torn wing. The sand dab flicks her tail. The tears of the wombat are green. Kiss me against the last hydrangea. Comrades, we are not yet free. Yeah.
Women aren't just victims in your poems. They push back.
Oh yeah, they talk back, they push back,
They fight back.
they fight back.
They what they say about a woman at 45. Too late to live, too soon to die. My wine is bittersweet, my song is rye. You go on to talk about other parts of your body, which I will not read.
Yeah, he's afraid of the C word. Or the V word he's afraid of.
But it is very funny. It's a very funny poem.
There's a V word, okay, and a C word, okay.
In the afterword to The Phoenix Gone, you write, I have not been rehabilitated in middle age. In fact, I want to reassure my friends that I am as feisty as ever, which we've clearly seen. I am still very much an activist poet who believes in my work, my life work, to infuse my art with three powers, to inspire, to illuminate, and to liberate. How does poetry do those things?
Oh, as Arden says, poetry makes nothing happen, right? Well, it's important that the poet believes that she can do these things.
Yes.
It's important for the poet to have this grand scheme of of things. I don't know. This. I just retired from my full-time teaching job. I'm gonna run around the country and talk about poetry and bring the good news,
Right.
present the good news. And it's important, I think.
Your poems do that, but they also push back at our temptation to speak in a grandiose way about poetry.
Right,
There are
right.
several witty lines here. The poet guards the conscience of society. No, you're wrong. She stands lonely on that hillock observing the pastures. Later you say, I do hate my loneliness, sitting cross-legged in my room, satisfied with a few off rhymes, sending off precious haiku to some inconspicuous journal named Left-Leaning Bamboo. It's such a great satire of the poet. And finally, how could we write poetry in a time like this? A discipline that makes so much ado about so little. Willfully laconic, deceptively disguised as a love poem. I mean, you implicitly challenge poetry not to claim more than it can do.
Right. And, well, I still love the genre.
Oh, yes.
You know, it's a genre that's closest to our hearts. When you're sad and lonely and angry, you write a little, you write poems,
Yes.
And so, poets, we're the stepchildren of literature, are we?
No. You're the queens and kings. Look at you laughing. There's a wonderful tribute poem here. I want you to read the first part, and this will be the end.
I read here?
Yes.
Okay. I wrote this for my friend, the activist poet, Mitsu Yamada. Do you any? Yeah, I wrote for her 90th birthday, and
She's still alive?
she's still alive. She's 93, and she calls me and says, when you gonna come and visit me? I might not have long. I might have another year. And so she's really great. But she was one of the first Asian American poets that I read, and her father was interned. She would. Was taken away to an internment camp for Mitsu Yamada on her 90th birthday. They say we bitch revolutionaries never go out of fashion. Look how fashionable I am. Wearing floppy hats and huge wedgie shoes, a feather bandolera and a lethal python. Sometimes we wear a fro perm because we hate our straight hair. Sometimes we wear it straight to the ankles like Murasaki. I bleach mine purple to look like Kwanan Cyclock. Maxine's beaming like the goddess of Nai Temple, a cross between Storm the X-Girl and Asoka Tano. We love our laser eyes, our Yoko granny glasses are dizzy. Short women, poets, unite. Revolution ain't just style, it's destiny. Remember the spiral perms? I don't know, you guys are too young. The spiral perms in the 80s, I had, yeah.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The hour's over? I can't believe it.
There are collections for sale in the lobby. Please fill out the questionnaires, and feel free to come up and talk to me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.